Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we get started with tonight's show, I just wanted to let you know I've been receiving messages from listeners who have been asking about how they can support the show. If you're interested in doing that, please visit the homepage of the Dogman Encounters YouTube channel. On the right side, up pretty close to the top, you'll see a link that states, support this channel. If you click on that link, you'll be able to make a donation to the show. The same holds true for the YouTube channel for Bigfoot Eyewitness as well. As always, thanks so much for listening. For tonight's show, we're going to welcome Mike and Mary back for part 2 of Dogman Terror in Oklahoma. Mike and Mary, welcome back.
Hi.
Hey, Vic.
Thanks so much for coming back. Let's dive right into it and talk about this experience you had last Saturday, Mike. From what you tell me, you saw a dogman that looked a lot like the werewolf from the movie Bad Moon. What'd you see?
Saturday night, I was pulling out of the driveway. Mary was at work still, and I was going to go pick her up. Our truck's broken down, and I was in our SUV. It was a fairly dark night. I mean, the time change hadn't happened, so it was pitch black outside. When I pulled out, I had to take our road a little bit slow because of the gravel, and they've been doing some work on our roads during the daytime, and so the gravel is a little bit slippery anyway. I mean, it's just very loose. Well, I had actually drove about 150 yards on our road and was making a turn. I had my dims on, and my lights actually hit something as I was turning. I locked eyes with it. It was in our neighbor's yard, but in the area where it was standing, it was kind of where a gully is. So where it was standing, it must have been, I'm going to say probably at the very least, 6'3", and I'm willing to bet probably more like 6'6" in height. Very bulky shoulders. It was like a very dark gray color. What really got me with this was how it was standing. Its arms were very bulky too, and it was like it was in a position where its back was not so much hunched over, but almost like it was, like it didn't really even care that I saw it. That was what really got me, was it was standing right there looking directly at the SUV. And by the time I had actually got a good view of it, I was already turning, and with it being on gravel, I had already actually picked up the pace. And I really didn't want to turn around and go looking, to be honest with you. It was in our neighbor's yard. They weren't home. I know that I saw what I saw. Its ears were pointy, and just the way it looked was very almost territorial, like it was establishing its territory. I mean, I've never seen something like that before, and I know we'll get to it later, but it's definitely not what I saw last summer. But this was, I really can't even describe how I felt when I saw it, because just how menacing it looked. I mean, there was nothing nice about it. There was nothing. This was pure primal. At the same time, territorial, establishing an alpha dominance. And it just happened to be the one night I didn't have my firearm with me. I decided to leave it at home when I left the house. So that was another reason. And another reason why I didn't really want to turn around and go back is I don't think our insurance would cover being attacked by a dogman and explaining what happened to our SUV.
Yeah, you're probably right there. I've seen a lot of different movies with werewolves in them, and some are scarier than others. I can't think of one that shook me up more than that werewolf in that movie, Bad Moon. I can't imagine what that would have been like.
Yeah, that's the best way I could describe it. I mean, it didn't look exactly like it, but enough to where automatically when I saw what was in my neighbor's yard, of course, that was the first thing that came to mind. And the second thing that came to mind was, I'm not stopping for this. I'm out of here. I had picked Mary up from work because on Saturday night, she worked until about 10 or so. I actually called her on my way, and I said, hey, honey, I'm on my way. I'm running a little bit late. Got something to tell you when I pick you up. And after I told her about it, as bad as it sounds, it was almost like, okay, now you've seen that. What else is there to be seen?
Well, that'd be a guaranteed Charmin moment for me. That's rough. Mike, in 2001, when you were home on leave from the Marine Corps, you and your cousin were walking on the road by your house when you suddenly realized you two weren't alone. What happened that night?
Yeah, This is actually something my cousin, I mean, even to this day, he and I both even said, we can't explain what happened that night. It was a summer night. I want to say it was probably maybe around July. This was areas that I used to go tracing through, and even at nighttime, there was nothing really ominous about it until that night, actually. We were just out and about, hanging out that night at my parents' house, and we decided to go walking down the road. I want to say this was around 11:30 at night. We were in the field, and we were actually walking toward the dirt road. Once we hit the dirt road, across that from there, from the field, was another pasture, and it was a cattle pasture. Well, the owner of that area, it had probably been maybe 2 or 3 years since he had had any cattle on it. So, I mean, the grass was really high anyway, and from where we were standing, you couldn't even see into the cattle pasture, mostly because there was some high weeds and a couple of trees that were by the fence. So to really even get a good look over there, it was almost impossible. We were standing there talking, kind of just strolling along, and all of a sudden, we had thought we heard movement. We both stopped, and my cousin actually heard it first. He goes, "What was that?" I stopped, and we both listened, and probably maybe 5 seconds later, we heard a snarl. It was the most eeriest snarl I'd ever heard. It was more like a sound. My cousin actually took off running, and I'm sitting there going, "Whoa, wait up." All that training, all the fight training, being combat ready, that kind of went out the window briefly because you just don't hear something like that. It definitely wasn't a dog. This was way too big to be a dog, as deep as it sounded. And I caught up with my cousin. We basically ran into the light, and my cousin goes, "You heard that too, right?" And I'm sitting there going, "Yeah, please tell me you heard the same thing I did." And no more than probably 10 seconds later, we heard it again. This time it was a loud snarl, and it lasted for probably 3 seconds of a deep guttural growl. What freaked me out is I know that from where I was standing, when I heard that snarl, if I would have reached out and took maybe 2 steps over and reached into the dark, I would have touched whatever it was because it was that close. It really freaked us out that night. The place where we heard it is what we had talked about regarding the hill. I mean, it was the same property where my parents live. It's about 40 minutes from where our house is here. Hearing that, it really just freaked us out to the point where we couldn't explain what we had heard and why it was still standing there when we had ran off, and it emphasized, "I'm still here, and you did hear me."
You mentioned running to the light. How far were you from the light?
We were probably a good 40 yards away.
Okay, 40-yard dash time.
Oh, yeah, and I think we made an Olympic record time that night.
Yeah, I'll bet you did. Mike, your sister saw something at your parents' house in the summer of 2005. What did she see?
She had woken up one night, and at that time she was a teenager. She said she had gotten up to go get something to drink. She was walking in the dark, and right when she walked from the hallway into the living room, when you turn on your left, there's a big bay window that goes into our backyard. Our yard light covers a lot of that area. So if you see something back there, even at night, I mean, it's going to be very visible. She wasn't asleep because she kept late hours at that time, too. She said that when she walked toward the kitchen table, she looked out the window and saw what she described as a wolf standing on twos. What was really peculiar about this was she said that it was smelling a punching bag. What she was talking about was I had a punching bag in the backyard, probably a good 30 yards from that kitchen window. So the light actually hit it. That was where my training area was at that time. I mean, I got there to do some heavy bag work and stuff like that. It was smelling it, and then it would look at the house. She got enough of a view of it that she said that she noticed it just kept smelling in the air. Then it would look at the bag again and just look around. Right when it was beginning to face the house, she dove to the floor, and she said that she crawled all the way back into her room because she was afraid that it would have seen her. She was so sure that if she would have stood there staring at it, it would have seen her, and she didn't want to think of what would have happened next.
That sounds like some nightmares I've had in the past. Look out the window at nighttime and you see something like that, you hit the floor and you try to crawl out of view. Wow, that's awful. Do you have wolves in your neighborhood? What I'm thinking here is there any chance that a wolf could have gone up to that bag, stood up on its back legs, and been what was sniffing that bag that night?
No, not at all. That night in particular, what she had seen, the way she described it was very comfortable standing, and she said how its posture was and the way its shoulders was. She goes, it was obviously very comfortable standing on two legs. That was just one encounter of what she had seen, and the way she had described it that night was there's no way. And the next day I went up there and I measured in height. We actually summed it up to be about 6 foot off the ground, the way it was standing.
Ah, I see. Yeah, just trying to cover my bases just to make sure that we're not missing something here. Mike, about 2 months before that, you and your sister were sitting on your dad's front porch late one night when you saw something in the far corner of his property. What did you see?
Yeah, that night it had actually been storming. The storm had actually passed. It was more of like a lightning storm. Where my parents' porch is, if you look out, there's probably a good 5 acres of clear land. Then the grass starts and it gets really wooded again. But on the acres where it's cleared, we use that for family dinners or get-togethers. We'll have everybody park out there, and my mom uses it as a walking track. That night, I want to say it was probably around 10 o'clock at night, and it was still pretty bright. We both looked out in the field, and all of a sudden, when the lightning flashed, we both saw, and my sister described it as the same thing she'd seen that night by my punching bag, standing at the far end of the field. And it was only for probably a brief second that we both saw it, but it was enough for she and I to both look at each other really quickly and go, "Did you see that?" It was standing by the wooded area and staring at us. I jumped up and I said, "What in the world is that?" My dad had walked out and he had asked what we had seen, and we told him. My dad's a big gun fan, being in Oklahoma and everything. So he loaded up an assault rifle, and I forgot what I was carrying that night, but we had actually walked out there. And the strange thing was, when we had gotten to the area where it was standing, we could hear something running at the bottom of that hill, which was probably, I'm going to say, another 200 yards away. But it was enough to where we could hear movement still walking. Neither one of us could really describe what we had seen that night, other than it was a prime example of what other people have described as something walking on twos. It had a snout. Its ears were pointy, but what she had seen that night, and I know that what I had seen, it was solid black.
Sure makes you wonder how long it had been standing there watching you two.
Oh, I know. It was just one of those things where we both froze for a second and going, we're both seeing this, and there's no denying that we had both seen something that night.
Oh, I'd say so. In late 2011, you had a brighter yard light installed. How did that change things?
Well, the activity kind of changed from the front of the house to the back of the house, kind of moved everything more into the shadows, a lot more movement, a lot more sound. That was also when we heard the door handle and like scratching on the back window on our back deck.
The way I think Mary and I have perceived it is, all it did was change this game plan of being in our yard and being mischievous to our property.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Mary, in July of 2011, you found the remains of a feral cat. Please tell us about the story behind that.
Well, a while back, I guess right after we moved in, there was a mother cat that was running around out here, and it was right around wintertime, and we just kind of took her in and fed her. And of course, just a few weeks later, she brought up all of her kittens. So we just kind of claimed them all, but we could never catch most of them. They'd come up, eat food, and kind of leave off with fur. We just left food out for them all the time and made sure they always came back. Well, one night in particular, the little female kitten didn't come back. She was probably, I don't know, about 2 months old maybe, and she was real skittish. A couple of the boys by then had let us pet them, but we weren't able to hold them yet. We noticed that she wasn't anywhere to be found. She didn't come up for dinner. Well, a day or two passed, and we still didn't see her. I mentioned it to Mike that it was kind of weird, asked him if he'd seen her. He hadn't seen her either. Well, a couple days later, it had warmed up real nice. It was around 4th of July. We were leaving, and we noticed that where our curve is going off on the gravel road, there was something laying on the side of the road. And when we got up close to it, sure enough, it was the feral cat. But the thing that stuck out in my mind, that still stands out in my mind, was it wasn't just hit by a vehicle or hadn't just laid down and died. It was like something ate half of her and like gnawed on the bone. And the other half was just part of a cat, but the other half was like, I don't even know how to describe it. The bones had been sucked clean with like gnaw marks. it was almost like something had, I can't even imagine what could have snuck up on this cat. I mean, the second she heard that door or heard us coming, she was gone like a lightning bolt. Whatever caught this cat, I can't imagine how quick it had to be. It was like something must have just picked her up and just went to town eating. I can't even imagine what could have took her out. But it was just, it's almost like it just started taking off, walking down the road, had a couple of bites, was done with its food, and tossed it to the side and just kept on going.
And it was almost like it was left for us to see, because where it was placed was right in the area where you wouldn't be able to miss it. It was the strangest thing because it just threw it down for us and probably the other neighbors to look at what it had done.
Yeah, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, dogmen do seem to do that. Mike, in 2011, a game warden was driving by and you asked him if he was in the area looking for poachers. What did he tell you?
Yeah, I'm going to say it was probably around fall time. This area of Oklahoma, I mean, we have a lot of deer, especially in our back property. There's a lot of deer that do come running through here. And that morning I had assumed that there had been some poachers that were out and about. A game warden was actually coming up the road. I just happened to be in the yard. He stopped and he had asked where a gentleman lived. And I said, well, he just lives down the road. Is everything okay? And what he had described was, I got a call. He goes, I'm just doing a follow-up. And he goes, the call I'd gotten was there was something that this gentleman had seen that was a cross between a ape and a wolf. He had stepped on his back deck one night and saw it under his light. And when he had seen it, it actually had ran off into the woods. This is what all the game warden had told me. I kind of looked at him with a little bit of a shock, and he kind of, in a roundabout way, kind of jokingly said, have you seen anything like that? Well, I really, at that time, didn't really want to divulge anything just yet. And I was more surprised that, okay, we're not the only ones that have seen something that's unexplainable. And I kind of just left it at that, as, you know, I'll be on the lookout too. But it was a surreal moment where, okay, we're glad that we're not the only ones that have seen something, and great. It reaffirmed that our backwoods and this whole area is being stalked by something.
Oh, I'm sure deep down you already knew that. Mike, one day your sister's friend was riding a four-wheeler way out in the sticks when a game warden stopped her to give her a message. What was his message?
My sister's friend, he's passed on now. He had a terminal illness. At that time, my sister would go over to his house and just really try to cheer him up. Her and her friends would really try to, you know, be there for him and, you know, make sure that he was doing okay. His biggest thing was he loved to ride four-wheelers. They would go out there during the daytime and they would ride four-wheelers for at least 2 to 3 miles down a trail. Where they had lived, when you said the word lives out in the sticks, I mean, they lived out in the sticks. Very beautiful home, but very secluded, way more secluded than even where we live right now. They had been on their four-wheelers and they had come upon a game warden. They had stopped and they were chatting with him. He had told them that whenever they do go out and about, don't go alone, and if possible, try to be armed, which really kind of shocked my sister. So she asked him, have you seen anything? I mean, is there anything that you've seen? And the way he had described it was he was setting out trail cameras, and something behind them walked across the field, probably
Not very far away.
Yeah, it wasn't very far away. And if I remember correctly, I want to say maybe no more than probably 40 feet away. What he had told my sister and her friends was, do not come out here by yourself at any cost, and definitely don't come out here at night because there's something in these woods that's not safe. My encounter with the game warden, he's kind of skeptical, but whoever my sister had talked to, he was very forthcoming as far as do not come out here at night. And if you do, make sure that you've got some friends with you and don't stay out here.
Yeah, it does sound like he was taking it a lot more serious than that first game warden that you talked about talking with.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, I'd say so. Mary, please tell us about the neighbor who's installed an electric fence around his property.
Well, there's a neighbor down the road from us, not too far. We run by his house sometimes when we're out jogging. He's an older native man. He has a couple of dogs. We had been out jogging in the summer, and we had noticed that It was really peculiar around his house. The dogs were running loose, and they'd come out to the road and kind of say hi, but they always stayed in their yard. But around his whole house, it fenced off with electric fence. We just thought it was really strange. We just kind of noted it between the two of us and kind of forgot about it. Well, as the summer went on, we just kept running up and down this hill, and the one day we happened to run by, he happened to be out in his yard getting his mail. My husband had stopped and talked to him, and him being native, they kind of had something to talk about right off the bat. My husband just kind of smiled at me and asked, "Hey, have you seen anything weird around here? Have you had anything weird happen?" And he just got real quiet, and the color kind of drained from his face. He just looked at my husband like, "Why did you ask me that?" Like he was not mad, but extremely annoyed. And he looked at me and looked at the ground, and then he got about 2 steps closer to my husband and was like, "I don't like talking about stuff like that. I don't feel comfortable." And he's like, "But I can tell you what comes through my property I've seen, and I'm doing everything in my power to keep it away from my house. It likes to look in windows. It likes to get a little too close for comfort, and it cuts across my yard and heads toward your property." And he goes, "I think it's coming or going to the river." He goes, "But it gets my dogs all freaked out, and the dogs will hide underneath the car." And he's like, "They're no good. They don't protect me. They go and run and hide." He's like, "But I don't want to say too much and then encourage him to come and freak me out because I'm already freaked out. It's broad daylight, and I'm watching my back in my front yard." He's like, "But some of the native stories are the more you talk about this, the more you encourage these things to be seen, the more you encourage it to come mess with you. And it's better, even if you have seen it, not to acknowledge that you've seen it, but to pretend and keep on going." His tribe in particular believes that the more you talk about it, the more you encourage it to mess with you, or the more you encourage it to visit you, whether it's a good visit or a bad visit. My husband, he's more of a, if you see it, you see it. It is what it is. It's not going to come just because you talked about it. It's not going to come because you didn't. It's here for whatever purpose, and we still don't know what that purpose is, obviously. But he got real nervous, and he went from having 3 strands of electric fence to having about 6. It's something that boggles the mind. It reassured us that we weren't the only ones that were having strange things looking in the windows and shadows that are definitely watching you. It's crazy to think that the few people that live out here, we've all seen something.
Last summer when I had talked to him, last time I'd seen him, I'd asked him again, "Have you seen anything lately?" And he goes, "Yep, whatever's out here, I can explain." Like what Mary said, my tribe, they do believe that if you talk about it, it will show up. But when we moved out here, we didn't talk about it at all, and it still showed up. So I'm more along the lines of it's going to show itself regardless. I kind of mentioned that to him, and he understood. But what he had seen one night was yellow eyes that were looking at him in the window. Reaffirmed what he had said of when he got his fence, when he had added 6 strands to it, is I'm going to need something bigger because whatever this is actually leaping over the fence. The way his house is reinforced now, he's definitely taking precautions to get something.
Oh, I can understand that. With the way these things seem to enjoy terrorizing people, it sure does make you wonder why they do the things that they do.
Yeah, exactly. I think for the most part he lives alone. Every now and then I'll see a car in his yard, but he kind of keeps to himself. But for someone to take that many precautions that he has, and also I'm sure that the stuff we've done, there's no doubt that there's something that we've all seen out here.
Oh, I'd say so. Mike, in 2012, you put up trip lines outside your house and had an interesting result. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, it was in 2012. I had actually ran some trip lines that ran behind the house that led up to our back deck. They were pretty strong, too. Very hard to see even during daytime. If you weren't paying attention, you were going to have a fall. I had put up some that probably stretched around maybe 20 yards. So whatever direction it was coming from, it couldn't get to our back deck so easily. I had put it out that afternoon, and that very same night, Mary and I were watching TV. I want to say it was probably maybe around 10 or 10:30. We had heard a boom sound. I looked at Mary and I go, "Did you hear that?" And it was from the same area where I put the trip line. And all of a sudden, we had heard like a rustling sound, and all of a sudden, another boom sound, like it had fell into the house. And we heard a snarl, and then we heard another thumping, and then a growl, like whatever it was that tripped up and stumbled into another line and was tangled up in it. When we heard that sent chills up our spines, because at the same time we're sitting there going, well, that worked. The next day, after we had heard that, we didn't hear anything the rest of the night other than that snarl, and it got really quiet after that. But I went and checked it the next day, and the lines were torn to shreds. I mean, something obviously had tripped over them. And the way I set those lines up, I mean, if one person would have fell on it, that would have been one thing. But the way this was, one of the lines that was looped through a tree was actually tore out of it. So it had a lot of power, whatever it was, and definitely caught it off guard, because the snarl and the growling sound was like a frustration. When we both look back on it now, it was a matter of that did work, but of course it only kept it away for another night before everything kind of resumed its creepiness again.
Did you ever have any second thoughts about doing that and possibly angering it?
Yes and no. I looked at it as just an early warning sign, hearing that, because any warning sign we could get when it's that close, we prefer to have. And as far as angering it goes, I really think that the amount of anger that it's had toward us from the time we've moved out here, it's been no different. If it's going to come after us, it's going to come after us regardless. We were just looking at, we wanted to take precautions, as we'll know when it's close.
I can understand that. Mary, in winter of 2012, you were having a bad winter storm. Both of you were heading to bed when something scary happened. What happened that night?
Yeah, we had decided we were going to go to bed. I went to switch the laundry in the laundry room, right off the living room, from the washer to the dryer. Mike had went off to bed, and I'd made one trip into the living room with some clothes and was going to fold them in the morning, and I went back into the laundry room. It was really windy. It was real cold. We'd had a really almost freakish thunderstorm that winter, and it was just real loud, lots of thunder, lots of lightning. It was just pouring, really, really, really heavy. I'd gotten the last load of laundry and put into the dryer, and it just started the dryer up when I just heard this incredible roar. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just like a roar. It was the cross between like a guttural growl, something really, really deep, and frustration. It was like something was incredibly pissed off, but at the same time, very, very much frustrated. It scared me. I jumped right into the washer and just kind of made a big bang and then like hit the door as I was running out to find Mike. And it was like, you're never going to believe what I just heard. And he was like, there's no way you didn't just hear that. Well, I walked back out there when he's getting up from, he's already in bed. I'm walking back out there to just kind of pinpoint exactly where I heard it. And right when the thunder was, it was just a big loud boom, I heard one more, you couldn't call it a howl. It was more like, almost like a mournful growl. But I mean, just shivers right down my spine. I don't think I slept the entire night. It was just, it sounded like it was mere feet on the other side of the wall.
That close?
Yeah, it was crazy.
Oh, I'll bet it was. Yeah, that does sound like a leave the lights on kind of night.
We definitely had the lights off, but I don't think I slept at all.
I can understand that. Yeah, that's kind of hard to get over right there. I wonder what that was all about.
It just seemed like whatever it was maybe got caught in the thunderstorm. We knew we were going to have a winter storm. I don't think anybody expected us to have the rain that came with the storm.
Sounds like an awfully intense night. Yeah, that's hard to get over. You also had problems in 2012 with your trash cans being tampered with overnight. What's the story behind that?
We had everything from the trash can lids being flipped up to the trash cans kind of being moved over. Being that it's on gravel, we have to make sure that they're set just so they don't tip or a car can't hit them or anything. But they're pretty heavy duty where they're not going to just knock over. It wasn't just our trash can. Some mornings we'll wake up and every trash can in the neighborhood has the lid popped up. A neighbor dog to do that, they'd knock the can over. This was like almost like something had walked through and was checking out everybody's trash. Other nights it was like something would stand out there and just hit the trash can, and if the trash can was up by the house, it learned how to pick up the trash can lid and just slam it. I don't even know how to describe it. It was almost like a kid. A kid would find that one annoying thing and constantly do it, knowing that it's annoying. It was like, ooh, a trash can, and snap the lid.
When you throw garbage into your cans, do you have them in trash bags, or do you just put the trash into the can itself?
Oh, no, everything's in trash bags. Tied up tight, and the lid's always shut down because it's real windy in Oklahoma. Don't want everything to blow.
If that's the case, in the morning when this takes place, do you find trash bags that have been pulled out and shredded in an attempt for something to get at food that might still be left in the trash bags, maybe?
We've had certain things pulled out of the trash can, and we've had it where it's almost like it's been rearranged. For the most part, we haven't seen a whole lot of trash every which way. It's more or less like curiosity, almost like, someone's been going through the trash.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, that's pretty strange. Mike, your friends have asked you too if you think it's a Sasquatch. What do you tell them?
Without a doubt that it's not a Sasquatch. Mary and I both have had an encounter with that also, just from its movements and from what we've seen, and listening to all the other encounters and reading up on Dogman, all the stories. Without a doubt, they're very, very different. A lot of friends wanted to believe it's a Sasquatch. We've had friends out here who don't want to come out and visit anymore because they've seen stuff. The consensus is, you're right, that's not a Sasquatch that's out here. We're never coming back. At nighttime, anyway. I'm pretty sure it would be easy just to say, yeah, there is a Sasquatch out there because it's a little bit more believable, I guess you could say. But, I can attest right now that it's definitely not a Sasquatch. And like I said, just from its behavior, and the Sasquatch that I've seen, it's definitely not that. There's no other way around it. I'm 100% convinced that it's a Dogman. I think Mary feels the same way, too.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen a Sasquatch before, and it was built totally different, and it didn't have the canine features at all. To me, they're night and day. I don't see how one person could see one and think they saw something else. They're two different things. In my mind, they're two different things.
Yeah, it's a really hard mistake to make. They look so different that unless you're really far away or unless there's a lot of brush blocking your view, I can't see how you could mistake the two. It's funny to think of it this way too, but I'm sure you both would love to have problems with Sasquatch in your area instead of Dogmen.
Honestly, I think that would be a lot better. I think I'd sleep better at night.
No, I understand.
Without a doubt, kind of going back to a lot of the old tribal stories that I've heard growing up when it comes to Sasquatch, these are stories that have been passed down from the elders. Don't go looking for it because it doesn't want to be found. But at the same time, if you do see it, don't bother it because it's not going to hurt you. It's doing its own thing, so don't go try to cross its path or be a threat to it, which is the complete opposite of the Dogman, because I feel like the Dogman's demeanor, at least out here anyway, is it's very ominous and its behavior is so unpredictable.
Yeah, they do seem to be polar opposites as far as attitude goes. Is it true that 3 to 4 of your neighbors have been chased off by the strange activity in your neighborhood?
Yeah, absolutely. We had the first lady who had left after her Pyrenee was attacked and killed. Not too shortly after they'd moved, a couple lived just kitty corner across the road from us, and they were only out here for a couple of months. The family that lived on the opposite side of us, their poor little boy was the one that had a monster in his window, as he said over and over again. My own opinion is that the parents, one of them had seen something, because it wasn't too long after we'd been told about the little boy having seen a monster that they packed up and they'd left as well. So there's at least 3 or 4 people. 2 of them had small kids and 2 of them had dogs. It was kind of weird that they just moved in, seemed happy, and a couple months later they're gone.
I wonder if all this activity has been taking place throughout the years, stretching way back, or maybe it wasn't until just recently when all this started, maybe right before you moved in. You talked about having to cut your own lot out and everything, but I'm sure there were houses in the area before that.
Well, it's kind of funny you say that because the paved road that we live off of, there is houses on there that have been there for, I bet you, 50 years. But where we are, we're cut back quite a bit into the woods. I mean, we're brand new. I mean, we've been out here, I think the oldest property out here is 7 years old. So all of this is brand new. This very well could have been, I guess, something territory or something could have lived here, I guess, is possible. All of our houses kind of got moved out here within, months or, a year or so of each other. One day there wasn't people out here. Fast forward a year and there's 20 families. It just seems like it is possible that something could have been here. It seems unlikely that it would still be here after so much growth and so many families have moved in and haven't left. Despite the other ones that have been here and have already gone, obviously there's enough of us that are staying. You think it would get the point. We're here now.
Yeah, you would think it would get the point, but maybe they're hard-headed. That is a really unsettling idea that might have been their territory before all the houses went up.
It's a good thought to think about. I mean, definitely something that we've thought about in the last few years. Maybe something was here. Maybe something did think this was its forest before the trees were cut down and houses were built. It sure could be.
Yeah, it sure does make you wonder. In 2013, you heard a loud boom on the north side of your house after hearing something walking out there. What did you find when you investigated it the next morning?
We were getting ready for bed, and I'm going to say this was probably around maybe 12:30 or 1 in the morning. We heard a loud boom sound, and once again, almost like a low growl, but there was nothing else that happened that night. And we had actually sat up and listened for a little bit. But at first we thought, okay, maybe something had actually hit the side of the house and was trying to scare us again. That night we had thought that maybe something had hit the house, but there was nothing else. And that was very peculiar because any other time it would make a noise and then we would either lead up to something louder or we would go outside, and there's been times where I've fired a round off in the air just to see what would happen. But that night in particular, there was nothing else. Like I said, we heard that low growl after we thought it hit the house. The next morning, Mary went to work, and I decided, well, I'm going to go out back and see if I can find anything. When I went behind the house, there was a dead possum there. And the way it looked like is it was something had grabbed it. There was no teeth marks or nothing in it. So obviously a Dogman has a better sense to eat a possum like the rest of us. But it looked like something had actually grabbed it and squeezed it. And you could actually see where it actually hit the side of our house and bounced off and was laying on the ground. It had obviously been dead for at least 16 hours.
No matter how many times I hear something like this happening, it's still just so hard to understand.
Yeah, and in 2011, when we found the feral cat on the side of the road, I feel like it was placed there for us to see, and this was the same thing with this possum. It wanted our attention that night, and it knew obviously we would be out there to go investigate the next day. That's another thing that I think sent a chill at both our spines was it threw that possum at our house, knowing we would see it and knowing it was letting us know it was still around.
They knew how to get a reaction out of people. Mike, around 3:30 a.m. in June of 2015, you woke up to find your dog barking at something outside. What did you find out?
That night, we had been asleep for at least maybe 3 hours. Where our dog's house is, it's pretty close to our window, and this is actually something that's really bothered me the most, aside from what I saw that Saturday. But that night in June, we had been asleep. Where I lay, all I have to do is look up, and there's the blinds right above me. So I've actually got a good view of the road from where I lay in bed. That night, our dog, he was barking, and the way he was barking was different. He's the type of dog, if he sees something, he'll bark, but other than that, he's really kind of a quiet dog. But that night in particular, his bark, it was very, I've never even heard him bark since then like that, but it was more like, get away, get out of this yard, you're not welcome here. I mean, just how I felt his bark was. I peered out the window, and that's when I'd actually seen what I thought at first was a timber wolf. And before I go any further, I want to say that I made sure I was fully awake before I even looked out. I just thought, okay, I'm awake now. There's a very ominous feeling that I felt when I first woke up anyway, just from hearing him bark. So I made sure that whatever I was going to see, there was no, I was having a dream, or, I just thought I saw something. I wanted to make sure if I'm going to see something, I'm looking directly at it. And that's when I had actually peered out the window, and what I thought at first was a really, really massive timber wolf. It wasn't near my dog. It was actually pretty close to the road, and from where I was laying, it was actually directly across from me. And from where our window is to the road, it's probably, I want to say, about 30 yards, and it was in the light. I actually saw this Dogman, because there's no other way around it. It was definitely a Dogman, or something that's definitely very unfamiliar to the skeptic would make a skeptic believe that night. It must, I want to guess it probably weighed around 250 pounds. I mean, it was massive. It was solid black, and its ears were sticking up, and it was panting. Not so much like it was thirsty, but like how a dog is more curious and it'll just look around, but it's still kind of panting a little bit. I saw its tail. It was actually wagging its tail, and it was a really fluffy tail also. I kept my eye on it, and at this time, I was actually reaching for my weapon. I never took my eye off it, and I thought, okay, it gets closer in this yard, I'm going to go out and definitely try to scare it off. It stopped, and it actually looked at the house, and then it looked at my dog, and then it looked down the road again, like it was, I want to say like it was more curious than anything. Bear in mind, it was still in the light when I could see it. And at first I thought, okay, looking at this really massive wolf, I know what I'm seeing right now. But what happened next actually is what really chilled me. It started on all fours, going to light where it was more visible, and that's when it popped up on two legs and took off running like a man. Without a doubt, this was a very normal gait of it walking like a man would, or any type of human being on twos would take off in a sprint. And anything from the way its arms were moving, it went into a sprint into the other side of the road, and it disappeared into the woods. It was very quick when it did that. I don't know if maybe I thought a car was coming down the road and it was going to go hide, but I have never seen anything like that before. As far as you hear stories of them on twos, but I've never seen one going on four legs to two legs like it was. It looked like it was more comfortable running on twos than it did on fours. And when it did that, it disappeared into the woods. I had went outside and I calmed my dog down, and I stood up there for probably a good, I want to say 15, 20 minutes. And when I went outside, of course, all the bugs and everything had ceased. It was dead quiet. And all of a sudden, everything picked back up like nothing had happened. I mean, the bugs started making noises again. And, country life came back to being a little bit more familiar. Everything seemed a little bit more normal. But for those, I want to say I probably saw this thing for a good, I'd say maybe 30 seconds of staring at it. I don't think it knew I was up, but the way its head was moving when I first did see it, I mean, I could even see its teeth. Its teeth weren't bared as in trying to scare my dog. Like I said, it was more panting. I don't know what provoked it to actually pop up on twos like that, but the way it did it was when it was on all four legs, it's like it pushed itself up and then straightened itself up and then took off running. And when it did, it almost kind of had like a slouch where it was leaning forward. But once it took 2 steps and it got into that sprint, it was gone. I mean, it just went into the night, and the darkness swallowed it up into the woods. It was nowhere to be seen after that. The next day, I told Mary about it, and I even went to the spot where I saw it. I'm 6'2", and I weigh 310 pounds, and I was actually on all fours in that same spot, and this thing was actually bigger than me, looking back at it as far as height goes. The way it popped up, it was very natural when it took off running. Like, it could get more speed running that way than it could on fours. But without a doubt, when it jumped up and ran on twos, I just sat there in bed going, oh my God, I just saw this thing hop up on 2 legs and take off running. And it didn't even seem all that concerned if anybody saw it that night. That was another thing that kind of freaked me out, was it was strolling in front of our house on the road, like it was taking everything in and just kind of looking around.
Would you describe its head as being in proportion to its body?
Yeah, very much. Everything about it looked like it was proportioned, but at the same time, I mean, its head was massive. I've had a lot of time to think about it and reflect on what I'd seen that night, and I want to say it was either the same thing or something very similar to what was looking in our window not too long after we had first moved in. Its height and everything, and the way its body moved, and especially the way its head was shaped. I mean, there's no doubt, looking back now, it was most likely either the same thing or of the same type of bloodline or species of what I had seen looking in our window staring at us when we were asleep.
Yeah, a lot of people who follow this Dogman topic mistakenly believe that all of them have disproportionately large heads, but that's not true. Some of them do have heads that are proportionate with their bodies. When it stood up on 2 legs, how would you describe its shoulders, or did it even have pronounced shoulders like a man?
Once it actually stood up on 2 legs and took off running, its shoulders were just like how a person would run. You know how when you go into a sprint, your shoulders and your arms are in tandem with the rest of your body, moving as one. It did the exact same thing as a human would. And its shoulders, when I actually got a good view of it standing on 2s instead of 4s, its shoulders were moving like a normal human being's would when it was running.
If you had to describe its front limbs, how would you do that?
Looking back now, I didn't get a good view of the actual limbs, because when I had first laid eyes on it that night, I was really trying to stare at its face as much as I could. Some of the body was actually behind a tree that's in our front yard, but I could still see its tail, and the way its tail was actually wagging was actually what kind of creeped me out, because it was so fluffy. But as far as its arms were, I never really got to see that part, and like I said, I was really trying to look at its face and try to judge how big its head was, and I was trying to see how big its snout was too, actually. When it actually did pop up on 2s, it was quick, fluid motion of pushing itself up off the ground and going into a sprint like a person would. Once it got momentum of running, I mean, like I said, it went into the dark and just went into the night and blended in.
And this definitely did have canine-style legs on it.
Oh, definitely. And that was another thing of how it moved, was it was a run, but it was also like a bounce when it first popped up.
Okay, I see. Wow. Yeah, that had to be one heck of a creepy night for you.
Oh, very much so. I had told Mary about it that morning, and I'd actually called a friend of mine and told him about it. Of course, he offered to come out one night and sit on the porch with a couple of assault rifles too, and I just thought, well, I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to kind of just wait and see more of what happens as far as its behavior goes. But I've never been able to explain why it stood in front of our house that way. It was almost like it really wasn't paying no mind to the dogs or really anything in the yard, but it was more scanning the whole area. Where it was in front of our house, the way it was moving, I mean, it was just standing there in one spot for, like I said, for at least 30 seconds. And probably longer than that before I'd woken up. the way its head was on a swivel, like it was smelling the air and taking everything in. Looking back, I really wish I would have paid more attention to the way its limbs were, its arms. But once it did pop up on twos, I mean, the shock of, oh my God, this thing is a world-class sprinter. Now, when it bounced up and did that, and it took off running, I saw it run across the road, and like I said, when it got into the dark, it disappeared completely. I couldn't tell exactly which direction it went after that. For all I knew, it could have went south or west of us, but just what we've seen or what I saw that night, that left no doubt that it was definitely a Dogman.
Well, that's a night you're never going to forget.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah, I'd say so. For about the last 2 years, your neighbors have been having trouble with something banging on their walls and doing other things. What have they been experiencing?
Well, the neighbors, for the most part, it's a mother and daughter that's there most of the time. Their father is, or her husband, I should say, was out of town at work a lot. The daughter had actually told us that they had some strange occurrences when he's not around of something hitting the side of the house. And they have small dogs in the house, and it wakes up the dogs, and the dogs bark, off and on all night. We'd commented on it to them. That's kind of strange, but we've had the same occurrence happen. It's probably best not to go outside. You hear it, just ignore it. Don't go looking. Is basically what we've told them, especially with the husband not being there, safety in numbers and all. We'd mentioned it before when he'd been here. He just kind of would shut them down, kind of like, oh, well, you guys just, it's your imagination, you hear probably the trash can, it was probably the wind blowing. He'd come up with something. And depending on when we would talk, sometimes the wife would be really adamant about, no, I know what I heard. Or his daughter would be really adamant about, no, Dad, you don't understand. I know what I heard. It didn't just hit the house once. It hit the house with such a force that it shook the house. That's not something a person's going to do. That's not something a dog's going to jump on your house and do. You're going to be able to know the difference. And she's like, we've had these occurrences, and we've seen something right when the sun's gone down. Something's ran through their yard. It ran between their yard, our yard, and the back cattle pasture. I think they've seen more than they're letting on, but at the same time, they're not ready to be open about it yet. They're kind of feeling and seeing what we know and, probably how crazy we think they're going to be, when in reality, we've only told them the bare minimum that we have to, not to scare the daughter. It's a little unnerving. You don't want to walk up to a new neighbor and be like, oh, welcome to the neighborhood. Oh, by the way, lock up your small children and lock your door. But you almost feel like you should. But, of course, people need to see it for themselves. No one's going to believe what I'm going to tell them. No one's going to believe what Mike would tell them. Unfortunately, it's all outside the box, and it's what nightmares are made out of. It's not what reality is made out of.
Yeah, that would be a hard situation to know how to handle. You want to help them on one hand, but on the other hand, if you do try to help them, they probably are going to look at you like you're crazy.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, I'd say so. You have a new neighbor, Mary, who shines a spotlight late at night around his property. Has he told you why he's been doing that?
Actually, no. I've actually never talked to the gentleman. I know he keeps weird hours. He works shift work. His hours are a little bit weirder than mine. I know that the whole back of his property is fenced off with a high kennel. It's probably 8 feet tall. And I know that runs the whole back of his house area. So nothing can get up on his back deck, and nothing can get to the back windows whatsoever of his house. And the weird part about him is he has a small deck off the front of his house, and it's a corner property, so it's kind of kitty corner from ours. But he'll either back his truck up, so he's like right up against the back of that deck, or he'll park at such a weird angle where it's like he's in a hurry to get to his house. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just a very odd behavior, but numerous times he'll wake up our dogs, and our dogs will just start barking, and you'll hear it. You'll wake up and you'll look outside, and it could be 4 o'clock in the morning. It could be midnight, and he's out there with a spotlight, spotlighting his whole front yard, where his vehicle is, right up to low-hanging limbs in his backyard. He lives alone for the most part. I don't think he's ever had anybody over there with him. I think he's always by himself. And he doesn't have any pets that I'm aware of. Never seen a dog over there. But the guy is very, 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 I guess, aware of what's going on. And all I can think of is maybe with him living alone without a dog, it's pestering him even more than it's pestering us because we have the 2 dogs. There's always an alarm going off as far as the dogs bark. Over there, I would think, if you're a single person, it's probably pretty freaky.
Yeah, it sure does sound like he's seen something. Maybe he hasn't told you about it, but it sure does seem like that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mary, you were weed eating last year when you felt like something was watching you. What happened that day?
Well, it was mid-morning. I normally have Mondays off, which is kind of weird, but for the most part, that's when all of my other neighbors are in school or at work. And so I'm usually one of the only people out here in our complex on a Monday. It was really nice out. It was hot. I decided to do some weed eating before it got any hotter. And I'd done the whole front yard directly in front of our house, near where the dogs were. And it was going by really quick, and I thought, well, I've got plenty of daylight, and it's not too hot out here. I'm going to go ahead and expand and go further out in the yard and just kind of follow down alongside our road where our property runs between us and our neighbors. And so I started doing the ditch and got closer and closer to where we have an old dog kennel. We don't use it anymore. It's just kind of hanging out, I guess, for the most part. I walked almost to the corner of our property, right up against our neighbor's property. We have a stand of cedar and pine trees right there between the 2 properties. I was just weeding away, and I just had this weird feeling like I was being watched. I shut off the weed eater, and I looked around, and the dogs seemed, calm and collected, and they were just kind of chilling in the sun. And it just seemed like a normal day, and I thought, okay, well, that's weird. I thought maybe a car was coming by or something, and I turned the weed eater back on and went back to cutting. I'd probably been out there a good 10, 15 minutes, and I felt it again. It was just like something wasn't right. And I shut the weed eater down and kind of looked around and picked up some sticks and got them out of my way and was kind of scanning the yard kind of nonchalantly. I didn't want to draw attention to myself because I was a pretty good distance from the house at that point. About this point, I noticed that my dog had been laying there just kind of chilling, and now he was sitting up and he was intently watching me. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. He pretty much just had been ignoring me the whole time I was out there. I continued. I went a little bit further than I probably should have went. I went towards those pine trees and was getting the corner between the pine trees and where this dog kennel is, and that would have been about the middle range of our yard from the house. I'm over there trimming some more, and I thought for sure I heard a big growl. It was real deep, but it was faint. It happened really, really fast. I just kind of looked around and was like, I really didn't hear that, did I? And I'm thinking to myself, it's broad daylight. There's no way. I trimmed a little bit further, and I started backing up away from these pine trees and started, nonchalantly kind of backing up. I wasn't trying to make it obvious. I was trying to make it very, very much not, I guess, depictive of what I was doing. I just slowly backed up towards that kennel and made my way on the other side of it, and I'd stopped. And I thought, okay, I really didn't hear that. And I just kind of stood there looking at the neighbor's property, and I turned and was going to go around the other side of the kennel when I heard it again. And this time, the trimmer's off, and it was just this deep growl and like a breath coming out. And it was right about 10 seconds later, and on the other side of the stand of pines, there's a strip of gravel road that runs into our neighbor's. That's our neighbor's driveway. Right between us and them, there's just a little tiny strip of trees, but there's just a little bit of grass right there. Otherwise, it's gravel or woods. I mean, there's just one or the other. This was on their side of the property, but in our stand of trees. And whatever it was standing right there. I mean, I could see the shadow move, broad daylight. Something was 25 feet from me as far as straight through the woods. Now, at that point, once I'd confirmed it, I thought about just taking off on a dead run, and it was like, nope, I don't want to tempt fate here. I just want to get back to the house. I don't want to start anything. I knew there was no one in the complex, and I knew I was a good distance from the house. And so I just turned trimmer back on and slowly start backing up towards the house. And I noticed that instead of it coming out towards the driveway, it went back towards the woods. And all I could think was, it probably knows the woods a lot better than I know the woods. There's probably a trail there. To me, it would have made more sense to go around on the gravel and come across on the road if it was coming towards me. It was just that much more creepier that it went back into the woods, and I could hear it. I could hear whatever it was, just big, heavy steps. And I thought, okay, that's it. I backed up as far as I could, and I just kind of pretended I was trimming, left it on, and just made a beeline for the house. And I got about probably a good 30 feet from the house, and the dog started barking. And that was just my confirmation of I wasn't the only one that was hearing it, and that this truly was happening in broad daylight. It literally scared the hell out of me. I mean, it was just this realism of daylight doesn't stop it from happening. It's that brazen. It's that bold. It doesn't care. And it was that much more reassuring of, even though it's light outside, even if there was people in the next 2 houses down, if this wants to be out, it's going to be out. And it just brought that reassuring fact of, even in daylight, you out here, you have to be aware of your surroundings. And I took that for granted. I never should have been out there as far as I was by myself. I remember going in the house and making sure the doors were locked, the windows were shut, and waiting for Mike to get off work so I could, just tell him the crazy day I had. And I remember I called him. I was like, you're never going to believe this.
You were faced with a really difficult situation there, but I'm really impressed by how well you handled that. That was really good, the way you backed up with that weed eater running and tried to act kind of nonchalant.
Yeah, I definitely didn't want to bring any attention to myself. I felt like I was already being watched, and I don't even know if watched is the word. It was like something was intently watching, or even maybe stalking. I don't know. It was way too creepy for my own feeling of I wasn't safe in my front yard. That's a very scary feeling, knowing that you're safer in your house and then wondering, how safe am I in here?
Yeah, I cringe when I hear people talking like they can go out into areas where these things are routinely seen in the daytime without having to worry about any problems from them. Most encounters seem to happen during the daytime, not at night.
It's very surreal to know that for a fact. I mean, it's just because the sun's out doesn't mean you're safe.
Yeah, it is really unsettling to think about that. Mike, one night not too long ago, you were working out with kettlebells when you got the feeling something was wrong. What happened that day?
It was kind of a cooler night. I want to say this was probably in September. It was dark out. It was, I want to say, probably around 9 o'clock at night. I've got a 60-pound kettlebell, and when I do the workouts with that, I usually do it outside, just so if I do drop it, it's going to hit the ground instead of causing some damage in the house. I was in the front yard. It was one of those nights when everything was really dark anyway. The moon was not out. It was kind of a cooler night, so I don't think I was the only one in the complex that was actually outside. I was doing what they call kettlebell swings. I had started doing them, and all of a sudden, my dog that's on the right side of me, he was probably a good 10 feet away. He jumps up and runs around the tree looking west toward our neighbor's house. I thought it was really strange, and when I was done doing my set, I put the bell down and looked over. He was standing very attentively, looking that way. He was growling really low, but not barking. I just made a comment like, "What do you see, boy? Is there something over there?" I'd walked over there by him, and whatever he was seeing, he was very uneasy about. So I had actually walked back over to the kettlebell, and I listened for a couple of minutes, and I didn't hear anything. So I resumed working out again. It was the strangest thing because as soon as I would start working out, I could hear something getting closer, but it was such a dark night that I couldn't really see anything. But I could hear around the same spot where Mary had heard that movement. It was around the same spot where I could hear movement also coming up. I put the kettlebell down again and listened, and my dog at this time was barking, and it was more like a threatening bark. And I stood there, and the strangest thing was, it seemed like each time I would start working out, I don't know if they took it as a threat, or if they took it as me trying to be dominant, or just use it as a window to try and get closer. knowing I was distracted by working out. But each time I would start doing these kettlebell swings, it would get closer and closer. And that last time, I put the bell down and I kind of walked out past where my dog is. I heard around the same area where Mary had heard the running, I heard something crashing through the woods again. I listened, and what was weird was, like I said, our back property, where the fence is that leads into the cattle pasture, I heard that fence make a loud boom sound like something had hit it. And it's a barbed wire fence, so you could kind of hear the rattling of it, like something had leaped over it and hit it and kept going. I probably stood out there for about another, I want to say 15 to 20 minutes, and I didn't hear anything else. But just doing something as simple as working out in your front yard, and then you can't even do that. Of course, it's nighttime, and I know a lot of people are going to think it's kind of strange working out in your front yard, but for us, that's pretty normal. We do it all the time. And I don't know if I'd actually mentioned this, but back in 2011, me and a friend of mine, he's an MMA fighter, we were in the front yard doing pad work when we heard a massive, massive roar. And I also kind of wanted to piggyback off what Mary said of even during daytime, you're either going to see or hear something.
How close was that roar coming from? Did you have the ability to make a guess on that?
If you recall, when I mentioned about the house that's in the cul-de-sac, it was probably in that general area.
That's close enough to make you pretty uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And at that time, there were neighbors on the left side of us, and there were two guys that were in their yard. I could hear them talking, and they heard it too, because I heard one of them say, "What the hell was that?" And at that same time, when me and my friend were doing some sparring in our yard, my friend stopped and turned around, and he looked at me, he goes, "What was that?" Same thing. And I go, "Well, that's just what we've gotten used to around here." And like I said, he's another one of the friends that has no problem coming out during daylight, but when nightfall hits, he doesn't want to come out.
I don't care how tough you are when you hear about something like this being around. It's only natural to want to steer clear. Mike, one night about 4 months ago, you heard a loud gunshot. What did you find out about that?
It was actually fairly earlier in the night. I want to say this was probably around 8:30. Mary was at work. I was in the kitchen, and I was sitting at the table, and I heard this loud boom, followed by another shotgun round. And I thought, well, that's our neighbor, and it's the same neighbors that have heard something hit the side of their house. I would say probably 10 minutes later, I called him. I said, "Hey, is everything okay down there? I heard you shoot something." Like Mary said, he's gone quite a bit, so he's usually home maybe 2 nights a week. When I asked him that, he was more irritated than anything, and he goes, "Well," and this is a direct quote from him, "some was in our backyard just now." I go, "Are you serious?" I go, "Well, if that's the case, then I'm going to step on my back deck, and if he's circling around, he's probably on my property." And my neighbor goes, "No, he didn't." He goes, "He's in that back pasture. I can hear him running." I go, "Well, did you see what he looked like? What was he wearing? Give you a good description. You might want to call the sheriff's department." And my neighbor goes, "Well, that's the thing. That moron, whoever he is, he was trying to scare us. He's wearing some costume." I kind of paused for a second. I go, "He would be out in your yard at this time of night wearing a costume, trying to scare you, knowing he could get shot?" And like I said, my neighbor is a very big skeptic. And he goes, "Yeah, he was wearing some type of costume. I never even saw the guy. All I saw was him leap over the fence." And he goes, "I didn't shoot him, but I know that I scared the crap out of him." I go, "Are you sure it was a person?" Of course, my neighbor goes, "Well, what else could it be?" But like I said, with him, he's still a big skeptic, and I'm not even sure exactly where, judging from the direction where he had actually shot at. But what he had said next was, "Well, whoever it was managed to leap over that fence like it was nothing, but I suppose if someone's coming out with a gun, you're going to move a lot quicker than you normally do." I told him, if he does come back, just be careful and keep your gun nearby. I'm going to have mine out tonight, regardless. And I go, "But are you absolutely sure this was a guy that was dressed up in a suit, that's what you said?" He goes, "Well, there's no doubt about it." He goes, "I think he was just trying to scare us." And, of course, this was around October when this had happened. So I think he was able to dismiss it as someone that's out and about trying to scare people. But, why would somebody be in a suit in someone's yard? And to get into that back pasture, I mean, like I said, that's easily 4,000 acres of open field. And behind there, you know, if you go up a hill, that's where the farmer lives. We don't know this farmer, but we've heard him shoot too. So the farmer's armed, along with our neighbor and along with us. Whatever my neighbor saw, I think he's either in denial about it or just firmly believes that it was a person in a suit. He said he didn't really get a good look other than it was black, and he just saw the outline of the body before it leaped over the fence. Mary and I have talked about it, and I go, well, the only way for him to believe that something's out there is for him to come face to face with it. I just hope that nothing happens, you know, during that time. Like Mary has said, his wife and his daughter, they've both heard stuff at their house, and he's the only one that is very skeptical of there's nothing in the woods, you know, there's nothing out there. It's all just old folklore. But if he was here throughout the week, he would probably be telling a different story.
Yeah, he can think that way if he wants to, but I'd be surprised if sometime soon he didn't get an education and find out what really is going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one of those things. All right, you two, I'd like for you both to give closing comments if you don't mind. Mary, please go first.
Well, all I can say is I've learned a lot as far as what's around us. I pay close attention to what the dogs are doing. Even in the daylight, I don't like to be out in the yard without the dogs close by and preferably other neighbors out and about. I've gotten pretty keen on carrying a gun. Not that I necessarily want to use it, but I feel like I'm a whole lot safer with it than without it. I guess in closing thoughts, all I can say is things do go bump in the night, and sometimes nightmares are real. I'd rather take precautions and think that what I've seen, what else could be out there, I really don't want to know, but I know what's out there, and I know I'm going to take precautions.
Well, that's very well said, and unfortunately, you're right. Nightmares are real. How about you, Mike? Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Kind of like what Mary said, we've definitely taken precautions, and I am glad that something like Dogman Encounters Radio does exist, because I've been reading a lot of the comments on Facebook and stuff like that of other people that have seen stuff on your Facebook page, and just hearing other people's stories. You know, there's a lot of people out there, I'm sure, that are still in denial or afraid to come forward with what they've seen. And, you know, I'd like to say that you're not the only ones out there that have actually had to deal with something. We're still dealing with it, and I know it's a long step to actually come forward, especially on a podcast, and say, you know, I've seen this, but what's out there is something that's hard to explain, but you're not the only one.
Very well said. Well, I can't thank you two enough for coming on and sharing all these details about the encounters you've been experiencing over the years. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Vic.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a great night.
You too.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.